Privacy isn't something you buy in the Philippines. It's something they let you think you have, right up until the moment you realize the whole barangay has been watching through your windows, counting your money, and planning your next move. I learned that the hard way when I thought respect meant being left alone. Sometimes the people promising to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by a retired teacher from Ohio who wanted others to know what foreign respect really looks like. In small-town Philippines, I arrived in Dumaguete thinking I'd found paradise. The flight from Manila had been bumpy. My back ached from the cramped seats, and I was questioning every decision that had led me to cash out my teacher's pension and buy a one-way ticket to the Philippines. Then I saw her. Milagros stood at the arrivals gate, holding a handwritten sign that read, Mr. Lawrence, with a bright smile that made the misspelling seem charming rather than careless. "Welcome to Dumaguete, sir," she said, taking my heaviest bag without being asked. "I work for the barangay office. My English is very good, yes?" It was. Better than most of my former students back in Columbus. "Mr. Lawrence, foreigners get so much respect here," she continued as we walked toward the exit. "You will see. This is not like other places in Philippines. Here Americans are very special." The words hit something deep in me. After 37 years teaching high school history, dealing with budget cuts and angry parents who blamed teachers for everything wrong with the education system, the idea of being special somewhere felt like medicine for a wound I didn't know I carried. "Everyone wants to help foreign friends," Milagros said, loading my bags into what she called her cousin's jeepney. The vehicle was painted in bright blues and yellows, with "God bless" written across the windshield. As we drove through the town, people waved from the sidewalks. Children shouted, "Hello, Joe!" and pointed excitedly. "They think every American is named Joe," Milagros laughed. "But they mean it with respect. You will love it here, Mr. Lawrence. This place will take good care of you." The ride felt like a parade I hadn't known I was the grand marshal of. Store owners smiled and waved, tricycle drivers honked their horns in greeting, and Milagros kept up a running commentary about how lucky I was to have chosen their town. "Manila is too busy, too expensive, too dangerous for a retired person like you," she explained. "But here in Dumaguete, we know how to treat our foreign visitors properly, with real Filipino hospitality." By the time we reached what would become my neighborhood, I was convinced I'd made the right choice. This wasn't just a place to live cheaply on my pension. This was a place where being American actually meant something positive. "This house is perfect for you, Mr. Lawrence," Milagros announced 2 days later, leading me up a narrow concrete path to a single-story structure that looked like every other house on the street. Concrete walls, metal roof, bars on every window. Very secure, very private. The irony of those words would hit me later. The house was simple but clean, with a small living room, one bedroom, a basic kitchen, and a bathroom with a shower that was just a handheld attachment over the toilet. The rent was 8,000 pesos a month, about $150, which seemed reasonable. "My uncle owns this property," Milagros explained. "He gives special price for foreigners because we want you to be happy here." She produced a stack of papers from her bag, all written in English, but dense with legal language I didn't have the energy to pass. "Just standard Filipino rental contract," she said, pointing to signature lines. "Very boring legal stuff. Nothing to worry about." I signed without reading. I was tired from house hunting, grateful to have found something suitable, and Milagros had proven herself helpful and trustworthy. Why would I doubt her now? "This is Maria," Milagros said, introducing me to a middle-aged woman who'd been sweeping the front porch. "She will clean for you 2 times each week. Very honest, very good worker. Her family lives just 3 houses down." Maria smiled shyly and spoke in rapid Cebuano to Milagros, who translated. "She says, 'Welcome to the neighborhood. Everyone here will take good care of you. That's how we treat our foreign friends here in Philippines." I moved in that afternoon, hanging my few pictures on the concrete walls and arranging my books on the plastic shelves. The house felt temporary, like a hotel room, but Milagros assured me it would feel like home soon enough. "You will see, Mr. Lawrence. This community will become your family. Filipino people, we know how to make foreigners feel welcome." Life settled into what felt like the retirement I'd always imagined, but never quite believed would happen. Every morning I'd sit on my small front porch with instant coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive. Children in school uniforms walked past carrying backpacks that looked too heavy for their small frames. Vendors pushed carts selling everything from fresh bread to ice cream, their distinctive calls echoing down the street. Women hung laundry on lines strung between houses, and men gathered around the corner sari store to drink beer and play cards even before noon. Everyone waved. Everyone smiled. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased to see the lone American who'd chosen their little corner of Dumaguete as his new home. "Good morning, Mr. Lawrence," became the soundtrack of my days, called out in various accents and levels of English proficiency. Milagros stopped by most afternoons around 4 o'clock, always with the same cheerful energy and the same questions. "How are you today, sir? Any problems? Anything you need help with?" She had recommendations for everything. Which jeepney routes were safest, which restaurants served clean food, which streets to avoid after dark. "That place is only for locals," she'd say about certain establishments. "This place is better for foreigners like you." I appreciated the guidance. After spending my entire adult life in the same Ohio suburb, navigating a foreign country felt overwhelming, and having Milagros as my cultural interpreter made everything easier. She introduced me to the best places to buy groceries, helped me set up a local bank account, and even accompanied me to the immigration office when I needed to update my tourist visa. "Foreigners always get confused by Filipino bureaucracy," she explained, as we waited in line for 3 hours. "But with local help, everything is easy." The respect she'd promised was real and visible. Store owners lit up when I entered, often dropping what they were doing to personally assist me. Jeepney drivers would wave me to the front seat and refuse my attempts to pay the full fare. "For you, special price," became another daily soundtrack. Restaurant servers brought me extra rice without being asked and checked on my table more frequently than they checked on local customers. I felt like a minor celebrity, and after decades of being invisible in American suburban life, the attention was intoxicating. The questions started small and felt innocent enough. "Sir, what time do you usually wake up?" Maria asked one morning while mopping the floor. When I told her I was typically up by 6, she nodded approvingly. "Very good, sir. Early morning is peaceful here." A few days later, she inquired about my schedule. "What day do you go to market, sir? I can help you know which vendors have best prices." When I mentioned I usually shopped on Thursdays, she seemed to file that information away with particular interest. The neighbors were equally curious but more direct. "Are you married, Mr. Lawrence?" asked Mrs. Santos, the elderly woman who lived across the street. When I explained that my wife had passed away 3 years earlier, she clucked sympathetically. "Very sad. But here you can find new happiness. Filipino women are very caring." Her son Roberto was even more specific. "How much is pension in America?" he asked while helping me carry groceries. "Must be very good to allow retirement in Philippines." I answered honestly, because I had no reason not to. These people were my neighbors, showing interest in my life and circumstances. It felt normal, even flattering. But the questions kept coming and got increasingly detailed. "Which bank do you use here?" From the pharmacist. "Do you keep cash in-house?" From the tricycle driver. "How much did you pay for your visa extension?" From the woman at the fruit stand. When I mentioned the pattern to Milagros during one of her afternoon visits, she waved off my concerns with that same bright laugh. "Filipino people are very curious about foreigners," she explained, "especially Americans. We don't get many retirees here, so you are interesting to them. It's not rude here like in America. Here, personal questions show that people care about you." Her explanation made sense and aligned with everything I'd read about Filipino culture, being more communal and less focused on individual privacy. I reminded myself that I was the outsider here, the one who needed to adapt to local customs rather than expecting them to accommodate my American sensibilities. It was the sari store incident that first made me truly uncomfortable. I was heading out for my weekly grocery run, having fallen into a routine of shopping every Thursday morning, when the crowds were lighter and the produce was freshest. As I passed the corner store, the owner called out cheerfully, "Oh, Mr. Lawrence, going to market today." I stopped confused. "How did you know that?" He grinned and tapped his temple. You always go Thursday morning. Very consistent, very American. The comment bothered me in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. I hadn't told him about my shopping schedule. I'd never even spoken to him beyond basic greetings. But somehow he knew my routine better than I realized I had one. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to similar comments. "Taking your afternoon walk early today," observed the security guard at the subdivision entrance when I left for a stroll at 3 instead of my usual 4 o'clock. "No visitors yesterday," mentioned Maria while cleaning. "Very quiet day for you, sir." The level of observation was unsettling. I began to understand that my life had become transparent in ways I hadn't agreed to or even realized. One evening while reading on my porch, I noticed movement in the alley beside my house. Someone was standing in the shadows, clearly watching my living room window. When I stood up to investigate, I heard rapid footsteps and whispered voices retreating into the darkness. I went outside but found no one, though I could hear hushed conversation from somewhere nearby. The next morning, I asked Milagros about installing curtains or perhaps building a higher fence around the property. She laughed, but it sounded different this time. Less warm, more dismissive. "Why do you need more privacy, Mr. Lawrence? Are you doing something wrong?" The question hit me like a physical blow. In America, wanting privacy was as natural as wanting food or shelter. It wasn't about hiding wrongdoing. It was about basic human dignity and personal space. But here my request seemed to mark me as suspicious, as someone with something to hide. "I just like my privacy," I explained lamely. "It's normal where I come from." Milagros studied my face with an expression I'd never seen before, calculating, evaluating. "But you're not in America anymore, Mr. Lawrence. Here, privacy sometimes looks like secrecy, and secrecy makes people worried." The conversation with Milagros bothered me for days, but it was Maria's slip that really opened my eyes. She was cleaning the bathroom when I overheard her talking on her phone in a mixture of English and Cebuano. "Tuesday the money comes," she said. "He gets allowance on Tuesday always." Then she noticed me listening and quickly switched to pure Cebuano, but the damage was done. I confronted her immediately. "What money on Tuesday, Maria?" She looked terrified. "Sorry, sir, I was talking about my own salary. My husband asks when I get paid." But I knew she was lying. I got my pension deposit on the second Tuesday of each month, and I'd never told her that. Someone else had. "Does Milagros come here when I'm not home?" I asked directly. Maria's face confirmed everything before she spoke. "Sometimes she checks if everything is okay, sir. She has spare key from your uncle landlord. She's just looking after you." The spare key, of course. I'd never thought to ask for all the copies when I moved in. I'd trusted that the keys Milagros gave me were the only ones. Now I realized my home had never been private at all. I started paying closer attention to the financial patterns around my pension deposits. Every month, like clockwork, Milagros would appear within days of my money arriving with some new expense that required my help. A festival that needed donations. Emergency repairs to the community center. Medical bills for a neighbor's sick child. The requests were always reasonable, always for good causes, and always just enough to keep me from building up significant savings. "Filipino community is like family," she would explain. "When someone has good fortune, they share with neighbors. It's our way." I'd been proud to contribute, happy to be part of something larger than myself, but now I saw the coordination behind it. Someone was tracking my finances and making sure the community got its share before I could accumulate anything substantial. The respect I'd thought I was earning was actually the respect you show to a reliable ATM. I decided to test my growing suspicions by announcing a change to my routine. "I'm thinking about moving to a different house," I told Milagros during one of her visits. "Maybe somewhere more private, where I can have a garden." Her reaction was immediate and intense, far stronger than I'd expected. "Why would you want to leave? Everyone here loves you, Mr. Lawrence. You are part of our community now." She started listing obstacles I'd face. The deposit I'd lose on my current place, the difficulty of finding landlords who would rent to foreigners, the connections I'd need to navigate the paperwork. "Besides," she added, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, "other places are not safe for foreigners. Here, we protect you. We know who you are, where you belong. Somewhere else people might not understand you like we do." The word protect sounded different in her mouth than it had when she'd first used it at the airport. Then it had sounded like a service being offered. Now it sounded like a threat being made. But what if I just want to try something different? I pressed. Experience another part of the Philippines? Milagros's smile became strained. Moving is very stressful, very expensive. Why make your life complicated when you have everything you need here? Good house, good neighbors, people who care about you. The conversation left me with a cold certainty. I wasn't a respected member of this community. I was a resource being managed, and my managers didn't appreciate the idea of their asset becoming mobile. The thought of leaving had triggered something approaching panic in Milagros, and I began to understand that my presence here wasn't just welcomed, it was required. Someone had invested time and effort in setting up this arrangement, and they expected a return on that investment. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, when I announced I wanted to change banks and get new locks for my house. I'd thought about it carefully, and decided these were reasonable steps toward reclaiming some control over my own life. I could have handled it quietly, but I wanted to see how Milagros would react to a direct challenge to the system she'd established. I want to move my account to a different bank, I told her, and I think it's time I had proper security for my house. New locks, maybe a camera. Her mask slipped completely. The friendly, helpful expression I'd grown accustomed to disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. That's not necessary, Mr. Lawrence. Why do you want to make things complicated? When I insisted it wasn't complicated, just prudent, she became visibly agitated. You don't understand how things work here. Foreigners need help to navigate Filipino systems. Without proper guidance, you could get into real trouble with banks, with immigration, with local authorities. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. She was reminding me how dependent I'd become on her help, how many official processes she'd guided me through, how many connections she'd provided. I think I can handle my own banking, I said firmly. And I think I should have control over who has access to my house. That's when she laughed. Not the bright, welcoming laugh from the airport, or even the dismissive laugh when I'd asked about privacy. This was something sharp and cold, the laugh of someone whose carefully maintained pretense had been challenged by an ungrateful beneficiary. So you think you can just do whatever you want here? She asked. You think because you're American, you can ignore how things work in our community? I realized in that moment that I'd fundamentally misunderstood my situation. I wasn't a welcomed guest who had the right to make independent decisions. I was a managed asset whose value depended on maintaining the status quo. The respect I thought I'd earned was conditional on my continued cooperation with a system I was only now beginning to see clearly. Over the next few days, everything changed. The transformation was so swift and coordinated that it felt orchestrated, which I suppose it was. Neighbors who had been friendly became distant overnight. Mrs. Santos, who had always waved from her porch, now looked away when I passed. Roberto, who had helped carry my groceries, suddenly couldn't understand my English when I greeted him. The sari-sari store owner, who had cheerfully tracked my routine, now seemed confused by my presence, as if he couldn't remember who I was. Maria stopped coming to clean. When I called to ask why, she said she was too busy with other work. Maybe find new helpers, sir. Many ladies need job. But when I asked around the neighborhood, no one seemed available or interested. The woman at the fruit stand claimed not to speak English when I tried to buy mangoes, despite having conducted our transactions in English for months. At the restaurant where I'd eaten dinner twice a week since arriving, the owner told me they were closed for renovations, though I could see local customers eating inside. I discovered through overheard conversations that Milagros had been busy. She'd told people I was difficult, that I didn't appreciate Filipino hospitality, that I thought I was better than everyone else. The narrative she'd created painted me as an ungrateful foreigner who had bitten the hand that fed him. Some Americans come here and think they can change everything, I heard one neighbor say to another. They don't understand respect. The barangay captain, who I now understood was Milagros's cousin, suggested I might be happier somewhere else. Some foreigners don't adjust well to our way of life, he said when I approached him, about the sudden hostility I was facing. Maybe you would be more comfortable in Manila or even back in America. The message was clear: conform to the system or leave. I realized that the entire community structure, the welcome, the respect, the helpful neighbors, had been carefully constructed theater. I hadn't been a valued member of this place. I'd been a mark who had stopped cooperating, and now I was being systematically excluded until I either fell back in line or removed myself entirely. Living in the community became not just uncomfortable, but actively hostile. My internet connection, which had been reliable for months, began cutting out at random times. When I called the provider, they said there were technical issues in your area, but couldn't give me a timeline for repairs. Other houses on my street seemed to have no connectivity problems. Deliveries stopped arriving. The grocery service I'd used claimed they no longer delivered to my address, though they continued serving my neighbors. The pharmacy couldn't fill my prescriptions because their system was down, but only when I tried to use it. The isolation was methodical and complete. When I tried to eat at my usual restaurant, the owner now consistently claimed they were closed, despite obvious evidence to the contrary. The jeepney drivers who had once welcomed me to the front seat now pretended not to see me waiting at stops. Store owners suddenly lost their English abilities when I entered, forcing me to communicate through gestures and pointing like a helpless tourist. Milagros had spread the word that I was ungrateful and suspicious, and the community had closed ranks accordingly. The speed and coordination of the exclusion made it clear this wasn't the first time they'd dealt with a problematic foreigner. They had a system for this, just as they'd had a system for the initial welcome. I understood now that the respect I thought I'd earned had never been about me as a person. It had been about me as a financial resource, and like any business relationship, it was subject to termination when one party became uncooperative. The community had invested time and effort in keeping me happy and compliant, but when I'd started asking for autonomy and privacy, I'd broken the unspoken contract. I was no longer a valued ATM. I was a malfunctioning machine that needed to be replaced or discarded. Sitting alone in my house with its barred windows, I finally understood what Milagros had really meant when she'd promised that foreigners get respect in the Philippines. We get the respect you give to valuable livestock, well-fed, well-tended, and carefully watched. The attention I'd received hadn't been admiration for my character or appreciation for my presence. It had been the careful monitoring that valuable assets require. The moment I'd asked for actual autonomy, for real privacy, for the right to make my own financial and living arrangements, I'd broken the fundamental understanding that governed my existence here. They had respected my money, my predictability, my willingness to be managed. They had never respected me as a person with legitimate desires for independence and self-determination. The laughing when I'd asked for privacy hadn't been surprise at an unusual request. It had been the reaction of someone whose carefully maintained illusion had been challenged by an ungrateful beneficiary who didn't understand his place in the ecosystem. I thought about all the foreigners I'd heard about who'd had problems in the Philippines, the ones who'd been labeled as difficult, who'd failed to adapt, who'd eventually left under mysterious circumstances. I wondered how many of them had simply asked for too much independence, too much privacy, too much control over their own lives. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Provide enough comfort and attention to keep foreigners happy. Extract a reasonable percentage of their income for community benefit, and maintain careful surveillance to ensure compliance. Those who played along got to keep enjoying their elevated status. Those who didn't got systematically excluded until they either fell in line or left. I had been naive to think the respect was personal rather than transactional, and even more naive to think I could change the terms of the transaction once I understood them. 2 months later, I was finally ready to leave. The process had been deliberately difficult. Documents went missing from government offices. Fees appeared that hadn't existed before. Bureaucratic processes that should have taken days stretched into weeks. Officials who had once expedited my paperwork now found countless reasons for delays. "Sorry, sir, system is down. Come back tomorrow." "Sorry, sir, wrong form. This one is old version." "Sorry, sir, need additional requirements." Each obstacle was small enough to seem like normal Filipino bureaucracy, but together they formed a pattern of systematic obstruction. I realized that leaving wasn't just discouraged. It was actively hindered to give me time to reconsider, to appreciate what I was giving up, to potentially return to the fold. The financial cost was substantial. Penalty fees for breaking my lease early, new visa processing costs, airline change fees, storage costs for belongings I couldn't take. Each expense was justified individually, but collectively they amounted to a significant penalty for non-compliance. I was being charged for the privilege of escaping. Milagros appeared at the airport as I waited for my flight, all smiles and warmth, as if nothing had changed between us. "Sorry you didn't like it here, Mr. Lawrence," she said with apparent sincerity. "Maybe you just needed more time to adjust. Filipino life is different from American life. Maybe next time you will understand better how to be a good guest." I didn't respond. There wouldn't be a next time, and we both knew it. I'd learned that respect and surveillance could look identical from the inside, and that asking for privacy was considered an admission of guilt when you were supposed to be grateful for the attention. I discovered that welcome and control were not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. The lesson had been expensive, but it was complete. Back in Ohio, people ask about my retirement adventure in the Philippines. They expect stories about tropical paradise, cheap living, and exotic romance. Instead, I tell them about the difference between being respected and being managed, about communities that welcome your money while resenting your presence, about the price of discovering that your privacy was never really yours to begin with. Some people listen carefully, especially those considering their own expat adventures. They ask probing questions about red flags, about how to maintain independence while respecting local customs. Others dismiss my experience as the complaint of someone who couldn't adapt, who expected foreign countries to accommodate American expectations rather than learning to fit in. "You probably just went to the wrong place," they say. "You should have done more research." But I know what I learned in that house with barred windows, watching neighbors count my routine like rosary beads. I learned that respect without privacy is just well-organized exploitation, and that sometimes the people promising to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. I learned that being welcomed as a valuable resource is not the same as being accepted as a human being with legitimate needs for autonomy and dignity. The Philippines taught me that there's a difference between hospitality and management, between community and surveillance, between respect and control. Not everyone who offers to help you has your best interests at heart, and not every smile is genuine. Sometimes the price of paradise is your freedom, and sometimes the people who promise to take care of you are really just taking care of your bank account. I'm glad I learned that lesson, even if it cost me more than I'd planned to spend on my education.